I started this build with a pile of wood strips. A few were straight, most were warped, some gently, some like they'd been trying to unbuild themselves. And as I sorted through them, I kept thinking about Clarence, my grandfather. I never met him, but the stories I've been told, they don't quite line up. He was brave, difficult, brilliant, messy. He lost his mother when he was 4 and was raised by his sister, who was only 10 years older than he was, and he lived with a body that betrayed him daily for his entire too short life. So I started to wonder, was he always that way? Or did life twist him like these strips of wood? And if so, what do you do with the ones that come to you already bent? Welcome to Museum of the Ancestors, a storytelling project in miniature where I rebuild the lives that shape me one small piece at a time. This story lives in the part of our history that asks why, and it breathes the ones I'm finding my way back to. This was supposed to be the satisfying part, the part where everything lines up, fits together, starts to look like something real. I had my pieces cut, the glue was out, the clamps were ready. I was building the first wall. I glued the joints corner to corner and clamped it all like I was taught. Tight, even, square. And then I waited, because 90% of miniature making is waiting around for glue to dry. I came back expecting progress. Some small triumph. But instead, the moment I released the clamps, the frame fell apart. They twisted out of alignment, pulled away from each other like they had their own ideas. At one point, I just stared at it like, what is this? Why isn't this working? Eventually, I stopped blaming the glue, stopped blaming the clamps, started picking up the wood pieces one by one, holding them to the light, laying them on the table to see what was true. And that's when I noticed it. They weren't straight. Some of them were bowed just a little, others had a full twist like they'd been through something. And suddenly it made sense. Of course they wouldn't hold. I was trying to build something stable with materials that couldn't lie flat. And that's when I thought of Clarence, the man this shed is for. I never met him, but I've heard the stories. Some say he was brilliant, a charmer, a risk-taker. Some say he was reckless, restless, impossible. And none of it really adds up, except maybe it does. He lost his mother when he was 4. His sister, barely out of childhood herself, stepped in to raise him. He had juvenile diabetes in a time when most people didn't survive it. So I started to wonder, was he always like that, bent from the beginning? Or was it the weight of everything, the grief, the fear, the instability that twisted him over time? That question stayed with me because I was looking at it, right in front of me. Bent wood that still looked like it should be useful. But it wouldn't hold. Not like that. So I stepped back. I had to. I was frustrated, confused, kind of insulted, honestly, like the wood and I had a personal disagreement. So I walked away, literally. I leashed up the dog and left the work behind, hoping that maybe if I stopped pushing, the story would start to tell me what to do. It made me think of Clarence again, the boy who had lost his mother at 4, the teenager who carried grief in one pocket and insulin in the other. But there's more to his story than sorrow. He came of age during the Great Depression, when every job was a lifeline and failure wasn't just personal, it was familial. And in the years leading up to World War II, before Pearl Harbor pulled the whole country in, Clarence made a decision. He didn't want to join the army. He didn't want to carry a gun or march into battle. So he joined the Navy, not to fight, but to build. He became a Seabee, one of the men who built the roads, the airstrips, the camps in impossible places. He didn't run from hardship, he joined it with a tool belt and a stubborn will. And that choice tells me something, that under all the charm and contradiction, Clarence wanted to make things that lasted. He didn't always get it right, but he kept building. And maybe that's what I was missing back at the workbench. I was asking little pieces to do too much. Clarence knew better. He knew you can't rely on a single plank. You need a foundation. You need the whole wall. You need to build on something bigger than yourself. By the time I got back to the house, I still had warped wood. Still had a failed frame, but I also had a better plan. Use the outer strips, build against the wall itself. Give the pieces something to lean on. That's what Clarence did, and it's what I'll try to do too. I laid out each plank of what will be the outer wall and glued it in the top and the bottom of the frame. Then I began adding the vertical supports, one by one. Long, straight strips I had sorted out earlier. Not perfect, but willing. Each one glued down with care, aligned to something larger than itself. And this time, they held. That shift, giving the frame something bigger to rest against, it made me think about Clarence again. I've talked a lot about what he lost, but this is what he had. He lost his mother when he was 4, Susie Benedum Brown. I never knew her, but from everything I've heard, she was kind, sweet, a gentle presence in a family full of strong personalities. And even though she was only there for the very beginning, I like to think that left a mark. After she died, Clarence was raised by his older sister, Elizabeth. We called her Auntie. She was 10 years older than him, basically a child herself when she stepped in, but she never let go of that role. She didn't have kids of her own, except she did. She became a teacher, first in the poorest corners of Knoxville, then all the way out in Arizona. And she was a mother to those kids, and my dad and uncles in between times. She drove a Chevy Nova like it was a race car and apparently took mountain curves at 70 miles an hour like she was late for church, but she knew that Jesus was her co-pilot. And eventually she came home to north central Indiana, and that's when I met her. Auntie was kind, steady, the kind of support you didn't always notice until it was gone. I was named for her. Elizabeth is my middle name. She helped Clarence stay on the rails even when his world had already come apart once. And then came Mildred, my grandmother. She married Clarence in 1940, right before the world went to war. They sparred intellectually, loved fiercely, made each other sharper and more stubborn in equal measure. When Clarence got sick and couldn't work anymore, she became the backbone. And when that wasn't enough, the whole family stepped in. My dad, just a boy then, took on 3 paper routes. He drove a hay truck in the fields when he was only 9, tall enough to reach the pedals, but not much more. They all carried weight Clarence couldn't anymore. Not because he didn't want to, but because sometimes your frame gives out, and you have to trust that someone else will hold you up. And that's what these walls reminded me of. These strips of wood, bent or not, could stay standing if they were anchored. Not if I expected them to bear the whole load alone. Support systems aren't always visible from the outside, but they're doing the work, quietly, steadily, holding things together when everything else is trying to come apart. They still aren't perfect, but neither was Clarence, and somehow, with enough help, both of them held. Not everything I tried this week worked. Some of it failed right in my hands. Some of it asked more from the materials than they could give, but piece by piece I figured it out. I found the strips that could hold. I changed the way I built. I leaned into the structure instead of asking the frame to hold itself. Clarence didn't always get that chance. He was handed warped pieces and told to make something out of them, and somehow he did. He built joy. He built children. He built chaos and charm and stories that live in the walls of my memory. And in the middle of all that building, he found brothers, not by blood, but by circumstance, his fellow Seabees, men with calloused hands and dirt under their fingernails, building roads and airstrips on the far edge of the world. They were rough, skilled, quick to laugh, and quicker to work. They knew how to make something out of almost nothing. Ice roads, timber bunkhouses, supply routes through frozen mud. But they also knew something deeper, how to hold each other up in a time when the whole world felt like it was falling apart. Because it was. The world was at war. Atrocities were being committed on a scale people could hardly understand. Men who had barely made it through the Great Depression were now being asked to cross oceans, build bases, hold rifles, bury friends. I imagine they were scared. All of them. Even the ones who hid it well. Scared the war would swallow everything. Scared they wouldn't make it home. And scared even if they did make it home, the world they returned to wouldn't make sense anymore. And yet, they built anyway. Because building was a kind of defiance, a way to say, we're still here, we're still human, we can still make something that lasts. And maybe that's why I've been thinking about Clarence so much lately. Because the world feels like it's shifting again. The headlines feel heavy. Things seem unstable in ways we haven't seen in a while. And in other ways, they've always been unstable. It's easy to believe that everything is coming apart, but then I look back and I remember, we've been here before. My grandfather stood in a collapsing world too, and still he built. Not perfectly, not cleanly, not without splinters, but he built anyway. When he was stationed in the Aleutians, cold and far from everything familiar, Clarence missed Mildred terribly. So he did what builders do. He made something. He took a silver quarter, flattened it, shaped it, polished it, and turned it into a ring. Something small but full of him. Something to send back to the woman waiting for him. She wore that ring every day of her life, and when my grandmother died, that ring came to me. And on the day my son got married, I gave it to his wife, my daughter-in-law. 10 years ago now. A silver circle passed from one hand to another. Bent, but still whole. Still beautiful, still holding. So this week, I built 2 walls. They're simple, but they stand. And sometimes that's all we're really asked to do. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever built something imperfect but meaningful, I would love to hear about it in the comments. What do you build with? What holds you up when things fall apart? And if you'd like to keep building these stories with me, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need it. This is Museum of the Ancestors, and the story's just getting started.